Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, PC. Long ago, the four nations lived with gamers in harmony. Then everything changed when microtransactions attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four controller types, could stop them. But when the world needed them most, they vanished. Almost a decade has passed and my Game Boys and I discovered a new avatar, a Sony pony named Dwight. And although his PlayStation skills were great, he had a lot to learn before he was ready to save anyone. But I believe Dwight can save the gaming world. Hey yo, what's up, low-hanging fruit? It's your boy, Dwight Smith, back at you again with another one. And today, folks, we are talking about video games. That's right, folks. This is a nerd culture channel, which means video games do fall under that umbrella. And of course, I'm going to talk about video games because they are near and dear to this little nerd's heart. Since this video will be my first on the channel about video games, I want to ask the very important question, what makes a video game a great game? I believe the answer to that would be the story to gameplay ratio. Let me elaborate. An open world game is only as beautiful and fun as what fills it. A fighting game only as cool and awesome as the mechanics used in game. An RPG as captivating and interesting as the story it tells. This all simply boils down to story to gameplay ratio, in terms of if one is lacking, the other must make up for it. If there are 2 hours worth of gameplay non-stop, then there has to be at least 30 minutes of story during, before, or after to set up expectations, to show you why you're doing what you're doing in game, and to actually set a precipice of why this game is even worth your time to begin with. We see examples of this in everyday games we play now, from poor examples of this like Middle-earth, Shadow of War, and Kingdom Hearts 3 that have way too much gameplay in between story beats, hence the story feeling or just straight up being lackluster. To FPS games like Call of Duty and Battlefield that don't really focus on story, with some exceptions, and thus have to rely on yearly releases to stay relevant, or else their spotlight would be taken. And all the while, classics are born from having the perfect gameplay to story ratio. I'm talking about from Uncharted to Metal Gear Solid to Halo to God of War, all these wonderful franchises and even more. Now, although the classics are where you always find the best examples of story to gameplay ratio, we cannot forget all of these amazing classics started as new IP at one point or another. In a world of endless reboots and sequels and remakes, you name it, we as a society, especially in the gaming community, have become stale, spoiled, scared even of the thought of something new. But don't get me wrong, there's greatness to be found in some of these, and a lot of them really, but I think that can also be seen as part of the problem. As we know, companies tend to invest in bigger and better and proven franchises rather than the smaller and newer IPs that not many people would be drawn to, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I can't blame them. It does make sense financially. Hell, it even makes dollars. But does that make a great video game? From indies to AAA games, all gamers of all ages and all generations rely heavily on the story to gameplay ratio. Even the skippers in the gaming world. Yes, that's right, the skippers. You all know them, you all hate them. Those people who skip through all the dialogue just to get to more gameplay. Yes, even those gamers rely heavily on the story to gameplay ratio. The story is usually the draw factor for most gamers in these cases, because the story has to be strong enough to actually get some gamers on board and draw us in. Building a whole new world is very difficult, especially for this story that has to be told in it, and you have to have everything from characters to settings to plot points all interconnecting and all connected in some form or fashion. And even having plot twists come into play from time to time, which literally flip the whole world / story on its head, to the point where plot twists are actually sometimes the top priority in some video games, making it a lot harder to write plot twists in video games than in most media like TV and movies. So with story in one hand, gameplay is on the other hand, which can literally make or break your whole video game. From brand new gimmicks to old gimmicks that are redone and polished well for the new gaming age. Everyone is looking for the next gameplay gimmick to put into their game. as long as it's unique. But nowadays, we are actually starting to see a trend that's been going on for a while now, that could potentially crush the whole gaming industry and all of its fans. I'm talking about the trend of gaming companies switching story to gameplay ratio to a more infamous and unlikely good substitute for gamers in gameplay to microtransactions ratio. With free-to-play games being on the rise in the last decade, most of their money comes from ad revenue, which does make sense for smaller mobile games. You're playing around, you finish it, you get an ad. Makes sense how they make their money back. So that kind of leads us now to the question of how do free-to-play console games make their money when you don't get ads, or at least not in the traditional sense. Unfortunately, most to all of us had to deal with the dreaded uprise of the microtransactions in the last decade. And of course, not just in the free-to-play games, but also our favorite online games as well, which is all just another great stream of income for these gaming companies from us, the consumers. Now, the true problem comes in from the profit that the companies get from these microtransactions. Now, even though most of us are aware of this, there are a lot of people who are not. There's a huge inflow of highly margined profit coming from these microtransactions straight to the gaming companies themselves, which makes this a simple idea to make a big margined income off of. And from this additional income from this simple idea, every single company is getting in on it. And the deadly result from this simple idea spilling over into other practices such as DLC and pay to win microtransactions. An example that I've personally run into myself in the past would be on the game called Apex Legends, free-to-play console game. Some skins for certain characters make those legends appear as another legend. Now, these characters aren't doppelgangers of a different legend or anything as bluntly as obvious as that, but their attire is changed enough to make it appear as though you're fighting one legend when you're really fighting a completely different one. Now, you're playing casually, it happens one-off, may not seem like a big deal, right? Wrong. When you have a split second to make decisions in video games such as Apex Legends, accurate information does matter. And that slight confusion can and does give the microtransaction buyer the upper hand. You may still continue to think, who cares? You probably don't even play Apex Legends. But that's what they want us to do. They want us not to care. They want us to point all of this anger of feeling cheated at each other instead of who the blame should be pointed at. And that's them. So DLC, on the other hand, is acceptable when made after the full product and release of the original title. I'm talking about an additional 10 to 20 hours of gameplay that the fans have just demanded because your game is so amazing and so perfect. There's no argument there. You deserve to get paid for every bit of your hard work. But building a 20 to 60 hour experience and then cutting out 10 hours of that experience to later sell as DLC, now we're getting into shady territory. And do you want to know what's even more despicable and disgusting at every single level? Creating and releasing the real ending to your video game as DLC. Now, to be clear, correcting your ending and re-releasing it as DLC, like in the case of Fallout and Mass Effect 3, acceptable. Hell, I even think those DLCs were free. Future Dwight, check me on that. Thank you. But in the cases of Ashura's Wrath and video games like it, unforgivable. So now, the silly joke costumes we bought for fun, the DLC that we craved for after 30 to 40 hour experience of the original title being released, have all been weaponized against us for monetary gain by these gaming companies. So now that microtransactions have been going strong for more than a decade now, every gaming company from small to world dominating are in on the game, either by greed or by necessity at this point. With huge and pop culture titans like Fortnite out there on the market now, which rakes in billions of dollars in revenue a year, more and more companies are looking towards the gameplay to microtransactions ratio route. And unfortunately, we can't blame them, but we can fight back. We are still the consumers. We are still the gamers. We still have the controllers in our hands. There is a big population of people who only play games for the pop culture references of Fortnite, I do admit, but I still do believe that us true lovers of the game, still outnumber them. So we have to use every tool at our disposal to fight back. Of course, voting with your wallet has always been the gamer's #1 fighting tool against injustice in the gaming industry. You don't buy what you don't want, You don't buy what you don't need, and you never buy what they try to force down our throats. But this time, that is the great start, but that is simply not enough. Twitter boys! Twitter boys! My Twitter warriors, get out there and blast those forums and blast the Twitter pages of gaming companies like EA that promote the worst microtransaction practices out there, man. Make sure you go loaded with knowledge and examples ready to show them that we're not gonna take this, man. And even though this won't happen overnight, I know with enough believers, with enough gamers, we can stop this before it's too late. Unlike global warming. Well, I may be off my soapbox for now, but I'm never tired of being over the bullshit that these gaming companies feed us. Be sure to come and share some of your own bullshit experiences from these microtransactions with me over on my IG and my Twitter. Same thing at IBFamousWDS. You'll find me there. Please share those experiences with me. I want to hear it. And when you do blast the forums and you blast the Twitter pages of these gaming companies, be sure to use the hashtag Micronuts. And be sure to tell them Dwight sent you. They won't know who that is, but that's fine. Future Dwight, play me out.